Hi, everyone. I'm Geoffrey. And let me give you a little bit of history about myself. I got my laurel for metalworking and tent making. I've been making tents since the mid 80s. I've made a lot of tents. Some of the people here have taken advantage of that. Most of this class is going to be from an article I wrote mid 90s on, so you want to build a tent, these are the steps you need to do it. Since this is a Scandinavian event, I tweaked it, or my wife suggested I tweak it a little bit to reflect the Viking culture. So that's what we'll be discussing today. Most of these concepts will apply to a regular wall tent as opposed to the Viking tent. Okay. Let me go to the next screen. Okay, my wife said I can do it that way. I'm going to try it this way. Okay. The typical Viking tent, you can see one in this picture here, is a triangular tube, for lack of a better term. Let's go over some of the pros of this design of a tent as opposed to a wall tent. A wall tent is your typical 7 foot at the wall marquee or square or rectangle. We've all seen them if we've been to an event. Okay. As for questions, unmute yourself and just jump on in or type them. I don't know if I can see that. This is my first time I've ever done a class using Zoom. So if I'm missing something, speak up, people. Okay?
Hey, Geoffrey, can I ask you what the basis is historically for this? Like, what are the findings that show this design?
I don't have any documentation on Viking tents per se, except on modern day artist illustration. I believe that there is one that they found on the boat.
Yeah.
And I don't know which boat though. I didn't do the research on this class. This was kind of thrown together. But
it's Osberg.
It's Osberg? Okay. Remember that. Thank you. And later on in this presentation, there's a point I'd like to touch on about that. Okay, let's go over the pros of this. It's very stable. If you've been to any large event and a windstorm has come through, I've never seen a Viking tent blow over. If it's been put up properly and it was constructed properly, it will stand up through just about anything, because it's a very solid shape. Okay. The next one is it's easy to construct. It's a couple rectangles and a couple triangles for the doors and you're done. It's very easy. Am I talking too loud, people? No one heard.
No, you're good.
No, you're good.
Sounds good.
Okay, and it's period. If somebody said that it's from the Osberg ship, okay? Some of the things about it that I don't think are optimum is usable space. And usable space in my mind is, I'm 6 foot tall. I don't like squatting. So everything from 6 foot down or 6 foot tall down is, in my opinion, usable space. This stuff over here that is shorter than 6 foot, and that's from the roof to the floor, in my opinion, is not as usable space as I would like it. Okay, so that's one of the biggest bugaboos about this that I don't like. There are some size limitations on it based on finding the support structure in that size. Okay, the support structure, normally the wooden frame that it is mounted on, that's a lot of volume of wood. that you've got to transport, whether it's the 20-foot long ridge poles or the 12-foot long supports. You're going to have a large vehicle to move lumber of this size. Storage also fits in this. It won't fit in a 1-bedroom apartment. Okay. Okay, next part is a fun game that I play whenever I start constructing a tent. It's called 2D Dollhouse. What you want to do, can everyone see this kind of sort of? Is on a piece of graph paper, lay out what you want in your tent. Not what you have now, but what you want a year from now, 3 years from now. You want to get, do you want to eventually take a queen size bed? Do you have an armor pile? Do you want a table and some chairs? Do you want to entertain? All of this should happen in the pre-planning stage. Doesn't matter if you're sleeping on an air mattress right now. Do you want to get it into a queen size bed eventually? So this is the first step, is lay it out. I use 1 square foot equals 1 square on the graph paper. Take a pair of scissors, and Corbin, I'm living dangerously here. These are my wife's fabric scissors, I hope. And
you're in trouble.
I know. And I'm going to cut all this out. I'm sorry if it's taking a little while, but
You're hurting us, Geoffrey, using those scissors.
I'm sorry.
My
We'll
husband
miss
knows
you.
better.
Yeah, we're going to miss you.
Table.
Because we
My
are so
wife
going to
left
tell.
the table, and so I'm
She's here. She knows.
okay. She's not coming out here yet, so I'm doing okay, I think. So I'm cutting all these out, and this is a fun game playing 2D Dollhouse. And this will help you determine the size of the tent that you need, whether you want it 10 foot wide, whether you want it 3 feet wide. I've made a Viking tent that was 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall. It was a Viking pup tent. Had the
Great.
frame and everything like that.
Let's go.
Okay. So take another piece of graph paper, a blank one, and kind of, let's look at a 10 by 10. So there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So I'm going to start out with a 10 by 10 square. Okay. And then you take for example, if we take the queen size bed and we put it in the middle of the 10 by 10 square, there's not much room left over for other things. But if you're single and you have a single bed, there's plenty of room left over for a table. This is very tough to do this way, but sorry for the delay on this. But a bed, a small bed, a table, and a chair might be better to fit in a 10 by 10. Okay. So play 2D Dollhouse if you're designing a tent, because it's very difficult to expand a tent. It can be done, but it's not worth the hassle. It's easier just to build it right the first time. Okay. If you look at this slide that's up here, earlier in the presentation, I mentioned usable height. My wife made this great graphic here where you can see the triangular shape of the Viking tent. and usable height. I gave you some formulas where you can figure out how much space will be usable and how much won't be. And I think if you look through Viking Tents or if you play 2D Dollhouse and you use this formula, you'll discover that you need a big Viking tent to fit everything that you want in there. That's one reason I don't like Viking tents as much as others. Okay. On the support structure, as I mentioned earlier, the planks on the front of it are normally wood. I've seen metal poles for the ridge poles. I've seen wooden poles. It's all personal preference. It depends on what you're going to need based on your size. There's a lot of support structure on a Viking tent for the amount of usable space. In my mind, it doesn't make sense. But if you choose one, these are some things you need to think about. Vehicle choice and storage. Lots of wood, lots of space taking up. So be aware of that. Also, the way I've seen most of these raised, it takes some strength or a lot of people to raise these styles tents. They're very stable once they're up, but to get them up takes some effort, okay? Frequently, there are interior ropes that run from the top joint or the top location of one end to the bottom location of the other end and vice versa. This adds to the strength of the tent, and you got to put them in there to get the stability. I also put down here Viking boat parts. Somebody mentioned that this was found in the Osberg ship exhibit. I own a couple of Viking boats, and I've been thinking, what would happen if I took 2 oars and made a part of the frame, and then took the mast and spread it between 2 sets of oars, and then took the sail and put it over that. That's a tent. So I think that might be how these started, but I'm not sure. There's no written historical knowledge on that. It's just from having the boats and thinking, oh, I could sleep here if I forgot my tent.
Do you have any guidance on wood expansion, like the picture you have there for that top pole? I've seen people with it where they can't get it down because of the wood swells.
My advice is cut the holes big, finish them all. First time you set it up, soak it and see if you run into that. Find another solution. Maybe put metal sleeves inside the holes. I've seen that. I think guy helped do that on one of the tents I built. It's been 30 years. There are ways around it. Again, that's one thing about relying on wood.
Yeah.
You get temperature and humidity changes. But you can, if your heart is set on one of these, you can do it. You can do it. I just don't feel it's the most effective and efficient design out there, but that's my personal preference. If you're into it, do it. Okay? Okay. Some other things to consider as you're going through the design process, and that's all this class is a design process class, is choosing your materials. Drew, you brought up wooden support structure. If you go for wooden and metal, you might eliminate the temperature humidity issues. If there are a lot of new man-made materials that would be very beneficial in this. For example, graphite or fiberglass poles for securing the two ends. They're lightweight, they aren't cheap, but they might fit and they could be easily disguised to assist in putting up a Viking tent. The other thing is floors. There are two ways to do these. One way is a big rectangle that you put on, that you anchor to the bottom of each side and go over the centerpiece, or you can make a big tube and slide all the support into the tube and then bring it up that way. I've seen them both. I'm not sure historically what, my guess is that they wouldn't have a floor in it in period. But in our lives, sometimes floors keep out water, bugs, and other things like that some people don't like. You could also lace it in if you wanted to spend the time doing that every time you set it up and take it down. One thing about a sewn-in floor or even a lace-in floor is it's great at keeping things out of the tent, but it's also great at keeping things in the tent. So if the tent does leak, or if you get a bunch of bugs in it, or anything else you don't like, they're in there to stay. It's some things to consider. Okay, fabric choices. This was picked off the article that I wrote 25 years ago. You can start out with canvas. Canvas, I use about 10-ounce fabric on most of the tents I'm running now. It's nice. It's more period than some other choices. It's easy to work. It breathes once you have it set up. Some disadvantages is mildew and rot. You need to make sure that when you store the tent, it is dry. Otherwise, it will rot and mildew. I had a friend of mine came over, spent time making a tent, took it to an event, packed it wet, pulled it out at the next event a month later, and I could smell the tent from, I'm guessing, about 50 feet away. He went to Walmart that evening and bought him a little pop-up. And the tent was ruined. You got it on canvas and any natural material, you gotta pack it dry. If it's raining when I'm pulling up my tents down on Sunday, I will have them up by Monday evening and I will let them dry out. Even if it rains again, I'll let them dry out at home. I've got the space where I can set them up. I can't stress this enough that you gotta pack them dry or you gotta store them dry, okay? To eliminate many of those disadvantages, you could go nylon. Nylon comes in almost any color of the rainbow. It's mildew resistant. It's frequently treated on one side. It's pretty nice to work with, but it's not a period choice. I made a lot of tents out of nylon. They're great for our game because they still look like nylon, but they look pretty good from a few feet away, and they're colorful. So if you want colors, nylon might be a way to go.
Hey, Jeff, can you paint them like you paint canvas tents?
You can paint them. There was a tent that we made for the Royals. It was a 25 by 15 marquee. And we had them silk screen the dags on it. So there are fabric paints that will work on nylon. Please read and please take a swatch and test it. So you can paint on them, you can silk screen on it. I just can't recommend any name brands on the paint or the silk screen ink to use. Okay. Silk is also good. It's period, but it's expensive. Vinyl, whether it be a Herculite derivative or whether it's hide of Naga or other stuff like that, it's waterproof if you do the seams right. It's mildew resistant. It's definitely not period. You can see it from a long distance that it's not period. But if it's all you got, use it. Okay. Miscellaneous fabrics, sheets, bargain bins, etc. Again, this was written back when Fabric King was around.
Love Fabric King.
It's gone now. Something else I want to put in miscellaneous fabrics are painter's drop cloths. I've seen a couple of tents made out of painter's drop cloths. It's economical. They're canvas drop cloths. And it's a good way to get fabric, and they're already like 15 feet wide. So you can just kind of, your amount of sewing reduces greatly. Or if you just want to tie them to 3 sticks, you've got a tent. The last one on here, which is a new fabric I've been working with recently, it's called Sun Forger. It's kind of pricey on the initial end of it, but it's a very nice canvas to work with, and it's water resistant. And the most recent tent I'm in right now, I made out of Sun Forger, and I love it. So if I have to recommend any of these, that would be it. But use what you got. Use what you can. Stay within your budget. Okay? Because making a tent will be an expensive issue. Yardage. Okay? This is, again, is a profile of a Viking tent, and you might remember something called Pythagorean theorem from high school, where a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Once you've decided on b, okay, the base, and the height, and again, that's from the usable space concept. How wide do you want it? Do you want it 3 feet by 4 feet, or do you want it 10 feet by 10 feet? It's all up to you. And this is, I'm just trying to put you into the questioning and thinking mode here. You're looking for the length of C. We have A plus B. C is the square root of A squared plus B squared. It's Pythagorean theorem. Ask any technical guy, and if they don't know it, they aren't technical, in my opinion. Okay. So I gave you 2 methods here to find it. You can either do B divided by the cosine of this angle, if you know that, or C equals the square root of A squared plus B squared, which might be the easiest. Okay. On the door, you're going to need 2 pieces that are A times B plus the overlap plus seams, if you have any. I use 60-inch fabric whenever I can get it. I've used 72. The wider the fabric, the less seams. So if I was doing a Viking tent today, I'd make it about 9.5 feet wide at the base, so that my door would just be a distance long, cut diagonally. Is that making sense? Okay, I'm seeing nodding heads, so I'm taking that as a yes.
Yeah.
Jeff, what if your fabric is single-sided?
If you're single-sided, let me back up a slide. You still do the same concept of A times B, or B wide and A tall plus overlaps and other stuff like that. but you cut the diagonal differently on each set of doors, and then you switch doors, one going from one end to the other. This is very easy to show on a piece of paper. Okay, if you look at this graph paper here, it's got the graph lines on one side. There's nothing on the other side. So if I take my wife's fabric shears again, she's not going to run in here too quickly.
Not
And again,
fabric shears.
give me another pair, dear. They were on the table. So let's say this is B wide by A long, okay? So here's one door,
Yep.
but the other door, the grid line is on the other side. Can you guys see that? So this door, let's say we want the grid lines on the outside, goes to the other end of the tent. And when you cut, okay, I just cut another piece of graph paper. It's a slightly different size, but this is just to give you a concept here. Oh, come on. Okay, so I've got my two pieces of graph paper here with the grid line on the outside. So here's one end. See how the grid lines are on the same side? And here's the other end. Okay, so one would go on one end of the tent and the other would go on the other end of the tent. And they would kind of be like that. And that way, if you have single-sided material, meaning you're using nylon and one side is coated, or you have a pattern you want on the outside of the tent or on the inside or whatever, this is a way where you can do that. And it was really easy to cut that way. Again, you need to think about overlap on the doors and other stuff like that.
How do you do the overlap on the door at the very top of the peak? Carefully.
I was going to say you force it. Depends on how you're wanting it, whether you want zippers on that or whether you're doing ties. You kind of do an overlap, and I've done enough of these where I don't sew with that many pins. Pin it all. Pin it and then sew it. Use safety pins, staplers, whatever you want to make sure that it's how you want it when you set it up.
There'll be a few inches at the top that the overlap is sewn into the left and the right hand side of the triangle. So I wouldn't necessarily cut your triangle exactly to A height. You're going to want to cut it to A height plus
a little
bit,
gotcha.
so that you can get that overlap between the two triangles.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
When I'm sewing a tent, I will I overcut it because it's a heck of a lot easier to cut it off as you're assembling it than it is to add it when you need it. So I'll add in a few inches here and a few inches there. And as I'm assembling it, I'll straighten those inches away. Okay? Something else you need to think about are the seams. What type of seam are you going to be able to use? I like French felt, or I think they're called French seams. they work really easily for my machines. To lay them down and to do a flat felled seam is much more work, but it looks a lot nicer and it's slightly stronger. So it's kind of, think about how many yards or how much material you're going to be stuffing through that sewing machine as you do these, and pick your seams accordingly. Okay? I can't stress this enough. Next slide. Waterproofing versus water resistance. There are many types of fabric out there. Some of them are already water resistant, waterproof. Oilcloth, which I helped make a tent with this recently. It's got pluses or minuses. Sun forgers out there, I've recommended that before. If you're using, for example, a coated nylon, you might have to get some seam sealer to coat your seams. A suggestion is to build a tent and see where it leaks and maybe work on those concentrated areas. There are some fabrics out there that no matter what you do, they're always going to leak. And you can kind of find this out by holding it up to the light. And if you can see through it, water can probably get through it.
Jeff, why is the seam sealer only on the nylon and not the canvas?
In the past, I have found that it's easier on canvas products. It's easier to coat the whole tent once it is done. I've used a trash can and 5 gallons of Thompson's. Thompson's has changed their formula recently, like in the past 10 years, and I'm not recommending this. Try it on a sample swatch. But I remember taking a tent, putting it in a trash can, and dumping 5 gallons of Thompson's on it. And it worked great because it got the seam, it got the fabric, it got everything. On the nylon, the seam sealer that you can buy in a camping store is specifically formulated for nylon, and the field of the nylon, the area away from the seams, is probably already has some waterproofing on it. Okay, and that's where the one-sided fabric comes in. A lot of nylon has a shiny and a dull side to it, so check into that.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So Geoffrey, I just want to add in, I had followed your instructions previously with the Thompson's water seal, but I didn't want to use the Thompson's because of the change that they had made. And I went to Boat US and I bought some fabric waterproofing from there. It was like $14 a gallon, so it was stupid expensive, but it worked great.
What did you put the tent in when you waterproofed it?
I put it in my armor trunk.
To pour the
stuff, yeah, to pour the stuff in.
That's great. I've used a trash can. I have a trash can that's specifically dedicated to waterproofing tents.
Yeah, I didn't have the trash can, but I emptied my armor trunk and put the tent in there and poured the waterproofing on top of it, and it worked very well.
That's
Just
great.
Thought I'd share.
Okay. Another way to waterproof a tent that I've heard about, that I've never tried, and I'm not recommending it, is beeswax. I'm very reluctant to even mention this because if you think about beeswax over cotton canvas, you've got a candle and you've got a big fire hazard, and that's why I'm not recommending this, but it is there. Okay. Next slide. All right, that is it. So I've covered all the steps for pre-planning. This is not sewing, this is pre-planning. if you don't answer all these questions or before you start building, it will be very difficult to finish building. Okay. Are there any questions?
I saw there was a question in the chat about linseed oil.
I've never tried it. Again, I feel that it's a fire trap waiting to happen. Not that nylon isn't fire resistant, but I've heard tales of a cotton rag that's soaked in linseed oil that gets thrown into a box that starts a fire. I feel linseed oil, you might be asking for trouble. But stored in an airtight container, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, rags soaked in linseed oil, when they get hot, they will spontaneously combust. I know Gary had that problem. Gar had that problem once in the garage.
So I'm, again, do it at your own risk. Okay? I can't see the chat, so I don't know about the other questions. Can somebody read them to me?
That was it.
Okay. Any other questions? Great. And that was under the 45 minutes. So, okay.
Thank you, Geoffrey.
Yes, thank you.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This is a lot of good info.